I was 250 feet above the Atlantic on a wind turbine when the world ended. No radio contact, no rescue coming. Just me, dwindling supplies, and 15 miles of ocean between me and a mainland overrun by the infected. I'm Harlan Thorne, wind turbine engineer, and this is how I survived the first week of the zombie apocalypse stranded at sea. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. My name is Harlan Thorne, and until a week ago, I was just another offshore wind turbine maintenance engineer working for Atlantic Renewable Energy. I specialized in troubleshooting electrical faults and performing routine maintenance on the massive turbines at Penobscot Bay Wind Farm, about 15 miles off the Maine coastline. Most people have no idea what goes into keeping these giants running, or what it's like to spend 6 weeks at a time essentially living at sea, climbing up and down these steel towers day after day. The job isn't for everyone. You need to be comfortable with heights, working in confined spaces, and long periods of isolation. I've always been good with the isolation part. Growing up in a fishing family in coastal Maine, I learned early that I preferred the rhythm of the sea to the chaos of people. That's probably why my marriage fell apart 3 years ago. My ex-wife said I was more married to my work than to her. Maybe she was right. Our daughter Ellie moved with her to Colorado after the divorce. I haven't seen her in almost 2 years now. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You want to know how I survived when the world went to hell? How I managed to stay alive when everyone around me was turning into one of those things? It started like any other rotation. Our crew of 6 had been out on the Windward, our service vessel, for 9 days. The Penobscot Bay farm has 27 turbines arranged in 3 rows, and we were working our way through routine spring maintenance. Weather had been good, work was on schedule, and we'd been taking turns going out to the turbines in pairs, staying in radio contact with the vessel. That morning, April 14th, I'd been arguing with Sandoval, our operations manager, about a faulty sensor on Turbine 7. The reading was within acceptable parameters, but something felt off to me. Call it intuition from 15 years in the field. She wanted me to move on to the next turbine in sequence, but I insisted on doing a thorough check. If I hadn't been so stubborn about checking that sensor, I might have been on the Windward when it happened. That stubbornness saved my life. The first sign something was wrong was when the daily supply boat from the mainland didn't show up. Not totally unusual. Sometimes weather conditions or mechanical issues caused delays. But Sandoval seemed concerned when she couldn't reach the shore office on the radio. The conversation was brief, but I caught enough to know something wasn't right. "That's the 3rd time they've rescheduled," she said to Martinez, our junior technician. "Operations said there's some kind of situation in Portland. Quarantine protocols." I didn't think much of it at the time. We'd been through health scares before. Remember the cruise ship virus panic a few years back? Plus, I was focused on my work, suspended about 250 feet above the Atlantic, troubleshooting that sensor inside the nacelle housing of Turbine 7. Around noon, I took a break to eat my packed lunch on the small maintenance platform. It was a clear day, and I had an unobstructed view of the coastline. That's when I noticed the smoke. Not just a small fire, but several columns rising from what looked like downtown Rockland. And the boats. There were way too many boats leaving the harbor, streaming out in all directions. I tried my radio. "Windward, this is Thorne on Turbine 7. You seeing this activity on the mainland?" Static, then Sandoval's voice, tighter than usual. "We're tracking it. Jenkins says the emergency broadcasts are going crazy. Some kind of outbreak. They're advising people to stay indoors." "Doesn't look like people are staying indoors to me," I replied, watching the exodus through my binoculars. "Just finish your maintenance and get back to the ship," she ordered. "We might need to cut this rotation short." I went back to work, but kept the radio open. Throughout the afternoon, snippets of conversation from the vessel painted an increasingly alarming picture. Words like containment failure and mandatory evacuation. The Coast Guard channels were chaotic, overlapping transmissions about blockades and securing the harbors. By late afternoon, I was nearly finished with my work when my handheld radio crackled. It wasn't Sandoval this time, but Decker, who was doing maintenance on Turbine 3 about a half-mile south. "Harlan, you copy?" His voice sounded strained. "Yeah, what's up?" I responded, adjusting my safety harness as the wind picked up. "You seeing this?" "Seeing what?" I asked. "The mainland. Whole sections of Rockland look like they're burning." I stepped out onto the platform again and raised my binoculars. He was right. The smoke had intensified, and I could now see what looked like active fires in several parts of town. The boat traffic had increased dramatically, with vessels of all sizes streaming out from the harbor. "Jesus," I muttered. "What the hell is happening?" "Must be bad if everyone's fleeing by water," Decker said. "My cousin works Rockland Fire Department. They don't evacuate for nothing." I tried reaching the windward again, but got no response. That was unusual. Sandoval was strict about radio protocols. Just as I was about to try again, my satellite phone buzzed against my hip. These phones were only for emergencies since the service was expensive. I answered immediately. "Thorne," I said. "Harlan, where are you?" It was Sandoval, and something in her voice sent ice through my veins. She was trying to sound calm, but I could hear the controlled panic. "Descending Turbine 7, almost done." "What's happening?" "The mainland crew sent Jenkins over in the skiff. He showed up alone instead of with the supply team. He's sick or something. Bit Martinez when we tried to help him aboard." Her voice cracked slightly. "Martinez is convulsing. We need medical evacuation but can't reach the Coast Guard. I don't know what to—" The line went dead. I tried calling back immediately. No answer. I switched to the radio. "Windward, this is Thorne. Do you copy?" Nothing but static. My mind raced as I quickly gathered my tools. Something was seriously wrong, both on the mainland and now on our vessel. I needed to get a better view of the windward. Climbing to the top of the turbine, I pulled out my high-powered maintenance binoculars. The service vessel was about 2 miles away, and through the magnification I could see activity on deck. People were running. Even from this distance, the movement seemed frantic, chaotic. As I watched, I saw what appeared to be a struggle near the stern, 2 figures grappling with each other. Then one fell to the deck, and the other seemed to— I couldn't be sure what I was seeing. It looked like one person was attacking the fallen crew member, but the movements were all wrong. Violent, animalistic. My radio crackled to life. "Harlan," it was Decker again. "Can you see the ship from your position?" "Yeah," I said, my mouth suddenly dry. "Something's wrong. Looks like they're fighting." "Fighting?" He sounded incredulous. "Who's fighting?" "I can't tell exactly, but something's definitely wrong. Sandoval called me, said Jenkins came back sick from the mainland, bit Martinez." There was a long pause. "Bit him? What do you mean, bit him?" "I don't know." The call cut off. I continued watching through the binoculars, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. "Decker, I don't think we should go back to the ship yet. Not until we figure out what's happening." "But all our supplies are there," he protested. "We've only got emergency rations up here for maybe 3 days. Better hungry than whatever's happening over there," I said, still watching the disturbing scene unfolding on the windward. Another crew member had fallen, and now there appeared to be 3. People engaged in the same frenzy over the fallen bodies. This isn't right. This isn't a normal fight. Just then, I caught a clear view of one of the figures as they turned toward the wheelhouse. It was Kapoor, our chief engineer. But even from this distance, something about his movements was wrong. Stiff, jerky like a marionette with tangled strings, and his face, what I could see of it, seemed oddly slack. My radio crackled again. "I'm picking up emergency broadcasts," Decker said. "It's breaking up, but they're talking about an infection, quarantine zones, military deployment." "What kind of infection makes people attack each other?" I asked. The answer came a moment later as I adjusted my binoculars for a closer look at the ship. Kapoor had moved into better light, and I could clearly see his neck and the side of his face. Dark veins, almost black, spread up from his collar, branching across his skin like ink in water. His eyes were vacant, staring without seeing. They're calling them the silent ones. Decker's voice came through, reading from whatever broadcast he was receiving. Infected people who show no symptoms until they suddenly turn. No fever, no cough. Just black veins at the neck before they lose their humanity. I watched Kapoor drag another crew member across the deck. The movements were predatory, efficient in their brutality. I watched through my scope as people I'd shared meals with for years began attacking each other on the deck. I said quietly, more to myself than to Decker. That's when I knew the nightmare had reached us at sea. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Whatever was happening on the mainland had somehow reached our isolated position. Jenkins must have been infected when he arrived on the skiff. Now the infection was spreading through our crew. As the sun began to set, I made my decision. I wasn't going back to the Windward. The small maintenance hub at the base of each turbine contained emergency supplies, limited food, water, first aid, and basic survival gear. It would have to be enough. Decker, I said into the radio, don't try to go back to the ship. I'm seeing the crew attacking each other. It's not safe. So what? We just stay on the turbines? For how long? His voice had an edge of panic. Until help comes, I replied, not believing it myself. The Coast Guard will notice something's wrong when the Windward doesn't make scheduled check-ins. But even as I said it, I looked back toward the burning coastline. If things were this bad everywhere, help might not be coming anytime soon. I descended into the turbine's maintenance hub and secured the access hatch. The space was cramped but safe, designed to withstand Atlantic storms and provide emergency shelter if technicians got stranded by sudden weather. I took inventory of my supplies: 3 days of emergency rations, 2 gallons of water, a first aid kit, basic tools, an emergency radio, and a solar charger. My thoughts turned to my daughter in Colorado. Was this infection spreading there too? Was she safe? The sudden, overwhelming need to know she was okay hit me like a physical pain. The emergency radio picked up fragments of broadcasts throughout the evening. Each report was worse than the last. Major cities along the eastern seaboard implementing quarantine measures, military establishing containment zones, advice for civilians to avoid contact with infected individuals identified by black veins at the neck and erratic behavior. If bitten or scratched, immediate isolation is required, one broadcast advised before dissolving into static. Sleep was impossible that first night. The radio kept broadcasting emergency alerts until about 3 in the morning, when the station just went silent mid-sentence. That silence was more terrifying than anything I'd heard before. As dawn broke on the second day, I cautiously opened the hatch to survey my surroundings. The Windward was still visible, drifting slightly off its usual position, but there was no sign of normal activity on deck. No running lights despite the early morning fog that would normally require them. I tried the radio again. Decker, you there? How'd you make it through the night? After a moment of static, his voice came through, tense but alive. Yeah, I'm here. No change on Turbine 3. You? Same. The Windward's still out there, but something's definitely wrong. No activity I can see. We compared notes on what supplies we each had, trying to formulate some kind of plan. Neither of us had enough to last more than 3 days. And with the mainland in chaos, waiting for rescue seemed increasingly unlikely. Through my binoculars, I could now see military vessels in the distance, but they were focused on establishing some kind of perimeter around the coastal towns, not on rescue operations. Helicopters occasionally passed overhead, but none diverted toward the wind farm despite our emergency beacons. They're containing, not rescuing, I told Decker grimly. Whatever this is, they're trying to stop it from spreading further. As the morning progressed, I continued to scan the coastline. The exodus had stopped. No more boats leaving the harbor. Instead, I could see that military vessels had formed a blockade, preventing civilian craft from departing. From my perch, I watched as military vessels formed a blockade around the harbor. I relayed to Decker. They weren't letting boats out anymore. Whatever was happening, containment had become the priority over rescue. By mid-afternoon on that second day, I'd established a routine. Every hour, I'd scan the horizon with my binoculars, checking the coast, the windward, and Turbine 3 where Decker was holed up. In between, I conserved energy, rationed food and water, and tried to make sense of the fragmented information I had. The maintenance hub wasn't designed for comfort. It was basically a reinforced closet at the base of the turbine, just big enough for emergency shelter. With the hatch secured, it felt like being in a submarine, all metal walls and the constant hum of the turbine systems. I'd spent plenty of nights in these hubs during bad weather, but never with the knowledge that the outside world was collapsing. I kept thinking about the black veins I'd seen on Kapoor's neck. In 15 years of medical training for this job, I'd never heard of any infection with symptoms like that. The way he moved, too, that wasn't normal. It was like watching someone who'd forgotten how to be human. Sleep was impossible that first night. I said into my satellite phone's voice recorder, talking to Ellie, though I knew she couldn't hear me. The radio kept broadcasting emergency alerts until about 3 in the morning, when the station just went silent mid-sentence. I'd started recording these messages almost automatically. If I didn't make it, but someone found my phone, maybe they could get the recordings to my daughter. Let her know I was thinking of her at the end. Around 4 in the afternoon, Decker called in on the radio. His voice sounded different, more determined, less panicked than before. "Harlan, I've been thinking. We can't just wait here to die." "What are you suggesting?" I asked, though I already had a sense of what was coming. "The windward. It's been quiet all day. Maybe whatever happened is over. Maybe they got the situation under control." I raised my binoculars again and focused on the service vessel. It did appear quiet, drifting about a mile offshore now. No visible movement on deck. "I don't like it, Decker. Something's not right about this whole situation. We need supplies, Harlan. 3 days of emergency rations isn't going to cut it. The ship has food, water, medicine, communication equipment. If we're going to survive this, we need what's on board." I couldn't argue with his logic, but every instinct told me the windward wasn't safe. I thought about what I'd seen through the binoculars yesterday. The frenzied attacks, Kapoor's black-veined neck, the unnatural movements. "Let me go instead," I offered. "I've got more experience with emergency protocols." "No," Decker replied. "I'm closer to the ship from my position. It makes more sense for me to go. Besides, if something happens to me, at least you'll know not to try." I wanted to argue further, but the truth was, we needed those supplies. And Decker was right. His turbine was about half a mile closer to where the windward had drifted. "All right," I conceded, "but we do this smart. Take your time, approach cautiously. If anything seems off, anything at all, you abort. The emergency skiff at your turbine has enough fuel to get you there and back?" "Checked it this morning. Should be fine." We spent the next hour planning his approach. Decker would take the emergency skiff attached to his turbine, make a wide circle around the windward to assess the situation, then approach from the stern where the boarding ladder was located. I would keep watch through my binoculars and maintain radio contact throughout. As Decker prepared to leave, I felt a growing sense of dread. "Keep your radio on at all times. If I tell you to abort, you abort immediately, no questions." "Copy that," he replied. "Wish me luck." I watched through my binoculars as Decker's small orange skiff detached from Turbine 3 and began making its way toward the windward. The sea was relatively calm, with just enough chop to make the skiff bounce occasionally as it cut through the water. "Approaching from the southwest now," Decker radioed. "No visible activity on deck. Ship appears to be on emergency power only." I adjusted my focus, scanning the deck of the windward carefully. He was right. There was no movement I could detect. The vessel was drifting slightly, its orientation changing with the currents. "Proceeding with approach," Decker continued. "We'll circle once before attempting boarding." As his skiff began to circle the larger vessel, I suddenly caught movement on the far side of the deck, a figure emerging from below, then another. Their movements were stiff, uncoordinated. "Decker, abort. I see movement on the port side." "Deck, multiple individuals." "I don't see anyone," he replied. Where exactly? Near the lifeboat stations. 2 figures, maybe more in the shadows. They're moving strangely. Abort now. But Decker had already completed his circle and was approaching the boarding ladder at the stern. I'm almost at the ladder. If I turn back now, I'll be exposed for longer than if I just get on board and take cover. Decker, listen to me. These aren't our colleagues anymore. They're infected. You don't know that, he shot back. They could be injured, needing help. I'm proceeding with boarding. I watched helplessly as Decker secured his skiff to the ladder and began to climb. He reached the deck and paused, looking around cautiously. I'm aboard, he radioed. No sign of crew on the stern deck, proceeding to the supply hold. I kept my binoculars trained on him as he moved across the deck, staying low and checking his surroundings. For a moment it seemed like he might make it. Then I saw them. 3 figures emerging from the wheelhouse, moving with that same unnatural gait I'd seen before. Behind you, I shouted into the radio. Wheelhouse door! Decker spun around just as the first figure lunged toward him. Even from my distance I could see it was Captain Reed, or what used to be Captain Reed. The dark veins were visible even through my binoculars, spreading up his neck and across his face. Oh God, Decker's voice cracked over the radio. Their eyes, Harlan, their eyes are all wrong. I watched in horror as Decker tried to retreat toward the ladder, but 2 more infected crew members cut off his escape route. He backed up against the railing, nowhere to go. Jump, I yelled. Jump into the water. Decker seemed frozen in place. As the infected closed in, Captain Reed reached him first, grabbing his arm. Decker struggled, breaking free momentarily, but the other 2 were on him now. I could have saved him if I'd just been clearer about what I saw, I whispered to myself, watching the struggle through my binoculars. His blood is on my hands. The radio crackled with Decker's screams, then abrupt silence. I continued watching, unable to look away, as the infected dragged him across the deck and out of my line of sight. I lowered the binoculars, my hands shaking. The radio remained silent. Decker was gone, and I was truly alone now. That night was the longest of my life. I huddled in the maintenance hub, the radio beside me, hoping against hope that somehow Decker had survived, that he would call in. But the only sounds were the wind and the mechanical hum of the turbine. My mind kept replaying what I'd seen, the black veins, the unnatural movements, the way they hunted Decker. These weren't sick people. They were something else entirely. The emergency broadcasts had called them the silent ones, infected people who showed no symptoms until they suddenly turned. Now I understood why. By morning of the 3rd day, I'd come to terms with my situation. Help wasn't coming. The mainland was in chaos, and the military was focused on containment, not rescue. I was on my own, with dwindling supplies and infected former colleagues drifting nearby on the windward. I needed a plan. The emergency rations would last another day, maybe 2 if I stretched them thin. The water was a bigger concern. I had maybe a gallon left. After that, I'd need to find a way to collect rainwater or risk dehydration. I took stock of what I had. Basic tools, first aid supplies, emergency flares, my satellite phone with limited battery, the hand crank emergency radio, my binoculars, and my technical knowledge of the turbine systems. Not much to work with, but it would have to do. First priority was water. I fashioned a rainwater collection system using the maintenance tarp and some tubing from the turbine's hydraulic system. If weather forecasts held, we were due for rain in the next day or so. Next was observation. I climbed to the top of the turbine, secured myself with a safety harness, and began a systematic scan of my surroundings. The coastline was still experiencing fires in some areas, but they seemed more controlled now. Military vessels maintained their blockade of the harbors. No civilian boats were visible. Either they'd all fled already, or they weren't being allowed to leave. The windward had drifted closer overnight, now only about 3/4 of a mile from my turbine. Through my binoculars, I could see infected crew members wandering aimlessly on the deck. I counted 5 distinct figures: Reed, Kapoor, someone who might have been Martinez, and 2 others I couldn't identify from this distance. As I watched, I noticed something disturbing. Occasionally, one of the infected would stop and seem to listen, turning their head as if tracking a sound. Then they would make that clicking noise I'd heard in the broadcasts. A rapid, mechanical sound unlike anything a human should be able to produce. They were hunting by sound. The realization sent a chill through me. If the windward drifted too, close to my turbine, would they hear me? Would they try to reach me? As the day progressed, my fears intensified. The currents were pushing the windward slowly but steadily in my direction. By my calculations, if the drift continued at its current rate, the vessel would come dangerously close to Turbine 7 by late tomorrow. I needed to prepare for that possibility. If the infected could somehow board my turbine, I needed defenses. I began fashioning weapons from my maintenance tools, a hammer, screwdrivers, wrenches. Not ideal, but better than nothing. I spent hours sharpening a screwdriver with a metal file. I told the voice recorder, still speaking to Ellie. What kind of world was this, where I was preparing to stab my supervisor if she got too close? The afternoon brought new developments. The military vessels near the coast began a systematic pattern of movement, forming a tighter blockade. Through my binoculars, I could see personnel in what looked like hazmat suits on some of the decks. Whatever this infection was, they were taking it seriously. I also spotted aircraft, helicopters and small planes, flying grid patterns over the coastal areas. Search patterns? Monitoring? Impossible to tell from my position. None approached the wind farm, despite our emergency beacons still presumably broadcasting our location. As evening approached on the third day, I faced another night alone with my thoughts and fears. The windward continued its slow drift toward my position. I secured the maintenance hub as best I could, using tools to reinforce the hatch. If the infected did reach the turbine, they'd have a hard time getting to me. Sleep came in brief, troubled, bursts. Each time I dozed off, I'd jerk awake at the slightest sound, convinced the infected had somehow reached me. By morning, I was exhausted but alive. Day 4 dawned gray and threatening. The weather was changing, a storm system moving in from the northeast. Under normal circumstances, we would have suspended maintenance operations and returned to the windward to ride it out. Now, the approaching storm was both a blessing and a curse. It might push the windward away from my position, but it would also make any potential rescue much more difficult. I checked my rainwater collection system. The tarp was properly positioned to funnel water into my containers when the rain began. Food was running critically low now. I had one emergency ration bar left, which I broke into thirds. One piece for breakfast, one for dinner, one for tomorrow. After that, I'd have nothing. Mid-morning brought the development I'd been dreading. The windward's drift had accelerated with the changing currents and rising winds. It was now less than a quarter mile from my position and closing. Through my binoculars, I could clearly see the infected on deck. They seemed more active today, moving around the vessel with purpose rather than the aimless wandering of before. Had they sensed my presence somehow? As I watched, I spotted a figure at the railing that made my blood run cold. It was Sandoval, my operations manager. Even from this distance, I could see the black veins spreading up her neck and across her face. She still wore the dolphin necklace her daughter had given her last Christmas. I'd been at that crew party, had seen the joy on her face when she opened the gift. Sandoval looked up at me with those black veins spreading across her neck, making that distinctive clicking sound. I whispered to my recorder. Her eyes were empty, but she still wore the dolphin necklace her daughter had given her. I knew. Then my friends were already gone. The windward continued its approach, drawn by the current toward my turbine. By my calculations, it would come within 50 yards. Close enough that if the infected somehow got into the water and could swim, they might reach me. I had to make a decision. The windward was attached to the turbine array by maintenance mooring lines, thick cables designed to keep the vessel positioned optimally among the turbines during normal operations. These lines were currently slackened with the vessel's drift, but still connected. If I cut those lines, the windward would fully disconnect from the turbine array and likely drift away with the strengthening northeastern current. But if I did, that I would be severing my last connection to the supplies on board, food, water, communications equipment that might still be functional. It was a gamble either way. Keep the lines attached and risk the infected reaching me, or cut them and potentially doom myself to starvation if rescue didn't come soon. In the end, survival instinct won out. I prepared my sharpest cutting tools and climbed down to the base of the turbine where the mooring connection was located. The wind was picking up now, whipping spray from the waves against my face as I worked. The mooring cables were industrial strength, designed to withstand oceanic conditions, but the connection points at the turbine base were accessible for emergency release. As I worked to disconnect them, I kept glancing up at the approaching vessel, now close enough that I could hear the waves slapping against its hull. With a final twist of the release mechanism, the mooring cables detached. Immediately, the windward began to drift more freely, caught by the wind and current. I watched as it slowly began to move past my turbine, gradually increasing the distance between us. On deck, the infected seemed to react to the movement, gathering at the railing closest to my position. Sandoval was there, her head tilted in, that unnatural angle, making that clicking sound that carried over the water. For a moment, it seemed like she was looking directly at me, though I knew that was impossible from her position. The vessel continued its drift, carried by the northeastern current that was now strengthening with the approaching storm. Within an hour, it had moved a safe distance away and was continuing to recede. I had made the right choice tactically, but strategically my situation was now more precarious than ever. I had cut off my access to additional supplies, betting everything on either the storm bringing enough rainwater or rescue arriving before I succumbed to dehydration and starvation. As the day wore on, the weather deteriorated further. Gray clouds thickened overhead and the wind increased to near gale force. The turbine, designed to withstand these conditions, adjusted automatically, its massive blades feathering to reduce strain. By late afternoon, the rain began, a steady downpour that quickly filled my makeshift collection system. I had water now, enough, for several days if I was careful. One problem solved, temporarily at least. But as darkness fell on the fourth night, I found myself staring at the last piece of my final ration bar. When it was gone, I would have nothing. The isolation, hunger, and exhaustion were taking their toll, both physically and mentally. I found myself staring at the dark water below, calculating how long it would take to swim to shore. I told my voice recorder that night. That's when I knew the isolation was breaking me. The storm intensified through the night, howling around the turbine structure with a fury that would have been terrifying under normal circumstances. Now it was almost comforting. The weather was a familiar adversary, one I'd faced countless times in my years at sea. Unlike the infected, I understood storms. I knew how to survive them. Morning of the fifth day brought a brief respite. The rain slackened to a drizzle, and visibility improved enough for me to survey my surroundings. The windward was now just a distant speck on the horizon, carried far by the currents and wind. I felt a mixture of relief and regret watching it disappear, my colleagues, or what remained of them, drifting away forever. My water situation had improved dramatically thanks to the rainfall. I now had almost 5 gallons stored in various containers, enough for many days if carefully rationed. Food, however, remained a critical problem. I had finished the last of my emergency rations the night before, and hunger was now a constant companion. A hollow ache in my stomach that made concentration difficult. I needed to think creatively. The turbine itself contained nothing edible, but perhaps there were resources I hadn't considered. I began a methodical search of every compartment and storage space in the maintenance hub, looking for anything overlooked or forgotten by previous crews. At first, the search seemed futile. I found spare parts, tool fragments, waterproof tape, electrical components, useful for repairs but not for sustenance. Then, while checking a rarely used equipment locker, I discovered something unexpected, a forgotten emergency kit wedged behind some spare cabling. It must have been placed there years ago and subsequently replaced with newer equipment elsewhere, then forgotten. The kit contained an unexpected treasure: 4 protein bars, a small bag of beef jerky, and a packet of electrolyte powder. Not much, but enough to keep me going for perhaps another 2 days if strictly rationed. I allowed myself one small piece of jerky to celebrate the find, savoring the salty flavor like it was the finest meal. With my immediate survival somewhat more secure, I turned my attention to the bigger picture. The storm had cleared enough for me to make detailed observations of the mainland. Through my binoculars, I could see significant changes along the coastline. Many of the fires had been extinguished, but several buildings still smoldered. The military presence had increased noticeably. More vessels maintaining the blockade, and what appeared to be checkpoints established along the main coastal road. Most significantly, I could now see figures moving along the shoreline and streets of Rockland. Even at this distance, their movements were distinctive, the same unnatural, jerky gait I'd observed in my infected colleagues. The silent ones had taken over the town. I tried the emergency radio again, scanning through frequencies hoping to pick up any broadcasts. Most channels produced only static, but on an emergency band, I finally caught a fragmented transmission. Perimeter established around Zone 3. All units maintain quarantine protocol. No civilian traffic permitted without clearance code. Repeat, no exceptions to quarantine without authorization from command. It confirmed what I'd observed. The military was containing the outbreak, not fighting it. They had essentially written off the infected areas, focusing instead on preventing spread to unaffected regions. My situation was becoming clearer and more dire. No rescue was coming. The military knew the wind farm was here, but retrieving a handful of maintenance workers from an infected zone wasn't worth the risk to their containment strategy. I was on my own. This realization led to my next decision. If rescue wasn't coming to me, perhaps I needed to rescue myself. The emergency skiff attached to my turbine contained enough fuel for perhaps a 15-mile journey, theoretically enough, to reach the mainland. But what would I find there? More infected? Military forces that might shoot first and ask questions later? The other option was trying to signal passing vessels. Though the military was enforcing a blockade, there might be patrol boats or other official craft that could be flagged down. But how to make myself visible from 15 miles offshore? The emergency flares would be seen, but would quickly burn out. What I needed was a more persistent signal. That's when I remembered the turbine's navigation lights, powerful LED beacons designed to warn aircraft and vessels of the structure's presence. Under normal operations, these ran on the same grid power that the turbines generated, but they also had battery backups for emergencies. If I could modify the lighting system to create an irregular pattern, something obviously not mechanical or automated, it might catch the attention of passing vessels. It would require rerouting power from the emergency systems and bypassing several safety features, but it was possible. This was my area of expertise after all. I spent the remainder of the day working on the modification, carefully disassembling access panels and rerouting connections. The work was precise and demanding, requiring full concentration, a blessing as it kept my mind off hunger and the infected. By evening, I had successfully created a manual override for the navigation lights. Now I could control them directly, creating patterns that would be unmistakably human in origin. As darkness fell, I began signaling. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short SOS, the universal distress signal flashing out over the dark water. I maintained this pattern for hours, stopping occasionally to scan the horizon for any response. Nothing came. Exhaustion eventually won out, and I retreated to the maintenance hub to rest. Sleep came quickly, but was troubled by vivid dreams. Decker being dragged across the deck of the Windward, Sandoval with her black-veined face staring at me, my daughter Ellie calling for help from somewhere I couldn't reach. I awoke to the sound of rain against the hub's metal exterior. Another storm system was moving through, heavier than the last. I checked my water collection system, ensuring it was properly positioned to catch the rainfall. Then I returned to my observation post, scanning the horizon through breaks in the weather. That's when I saw it. A vessel approximately 2 miles out, moving in a deliberate pattern around the perimeter of the wind farm. Not a military ship based on its profile, but a civilian craft. A fishing trawler from the looks of it. And its movement pattern wasn't random. It appeared to be systematically checking each turbine. My heart rate spiked. This could be rescue, or at least contact with other survivors. I immediately reactivated my light signal, flashing the SOS pattern with increased urgency. For several tense minutes, I watched the vessel, trying to determine if they had spotted my signal. Its course didn't change, continuing its methodical circuit of the wind farm perimeter. I needed something more visible, more dramatic. The emergency flares were my best option, but I only had 3. I needed to time their use perfectly when the vessel was looking in my direction and visibility was optimal. A break in the rain provided my opportunity. The vessel had completed its inspection of Turbine 10 and was turning toward my position. I grabbed a flare, climbed to the highest accessible point on the exterior of the turbine, and fired it into the sky. The red light burst overhead, brilliantly visible against the gray clouds. Through my binoculars, I could see movement on the deck of the trawler. They had spotted the flare, but instead of approaching, the vessel maintained its distance, continuing to observe. Were they being cautious? Afraid I might be infected? I couldn't blame them for their hesitation, but frustration welled up nonetheless. This might be my only chance at contact. I fired a second flare, then returned to the light signal, flashing SOS continuously. The vessel altered course slightly, moving to a position with a clearer view of my turbine, but still maintaining significant distance. They were definitely watching me now, but remained wary. I needed to prove I wasn't infected. The broadcast had mentioned the distinctive black veins as the visible symptom. If I could somehow show them I was unaffected, perhaps they would approach. I grabbed a maintenance spotlight, powerful enough to be visible at their distance, and directed it at my face and neck, turning slowly so they could see I showed no signs of infection. Hours passed in this strange standoff. The fishing vessel remained, observing my turbine from a safe distance, while I continued signaling and attempting to demonstrate my uninfected status. As daylight began to fade, I feared they would leave under cover of darkness. But as the sun set, I noticed a change. The vessel was carefully maneuvering closer, though still maintaining what they must have considered a safe distance. Through my binoculars, I could now make out figures on deck, 3 people in foul weather gear, one holding what appeared to be a rifle. They were being cautious, but they were approaching. They had every reason to leave me there, I said aloud, recording my thoughts for Ellie. One more mouth to feed, potentially infected. I wouldn't have blamed them for sailing away. Night fell completely, but the vessel remained, now positioned about half a mile from my turbine. Occasionally, they would shine a spotlight in my direction, and I would respond with my own light signals. We had established a primitive form of communication, but they still weren't coming close enough for actual rescue. I spent another uncomfortable night in the maintenance hub, hope and anxiety battling for dominance in my thoughts. Would they still be there in the morning? And if they were, would they finally approach? Dawn of the 6th day brought clarity. The fishing vessel remained, now anchored about a quarter-mile from my turbine. Through my binoculars, I could see activity on deck. They were preparing a smaller boat, presumably to approach my position. After nearly a week of isolation, I was about to have human contact again. I gathered my few important possessions: the satellite phone with my recordings for Ellie, the emergency radio, my identification, and the tools that had kept me alive. If rescue was indeed coming, I wanted to be ready. The small boat launched from the trawler with 2 people aboard. As they approached, I could see they were taking no chances. Both wore what appeared to be homemade protective gear, face masks, and one held that rifle I'd spotted earlier at the ready. They circled my turbine once, staying well back from the yaw structure, observing. I stood on the exterior platform, clearly visible, keeping my hands open and away from my body to appear non-threatening. Finally, the boat approached the access ladder at the base of the turbine. "Stay where you are," a voice called up. Male, authoritative. "Turn around slowly. Show us your neck." I complied, turning in a full circle to demonstrate I had no signs of infection. "How long have you been out here?" the voice called. 6 days, I shouted back. "Since the outbreak reached our service vessel." I'm the only survivor from my maintenance crew. There was a consultation between the two figures in the boat, too quiet for me to hear. Then the same voice. We're coming up. Any weapons? Put them down now. No weapons, I called back. Just maintenance tools. I watched as one figure began climbing the access ladder, rifle slung across his back but clearly ready for trouble. He was an older man, perhaps in his 60s, with a weathered face and the practiced movements of someone who had spent a lifetime at sea. He reached the platform where I stood and maintained a careful distance, studying me intently. Name? He asked. Harlan Thorne, wind turbine maintenance engineer for Atlantic Renewable Energy. Any bites, scratches, contact with infected? None. I've been isolated on this turbine since before the crew of our service vessel turned. Watched it happen through binoculars. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answers and appearance. I'm Captain Reynolds, formerly Coast Guard, now just trying to keep my people alive. We've been gathering survivors with useful skills. He gestured toward the trawler in the distance. That's the Northern Star. We've established a community on Fox Island about 20 miles up the coast. Defensible, isolated, with enough resources to be sustainable if we're smart. For the first time in days, I felt a flutter of genuine hope. Why did you come to the wind farm? Power, he said simply. These turbines generate massive amounts of electricity. If someone with the right knowledge could help us harvest that, even from just 1 or 2 units, we'd have sustainable power for our community. Lights, refrigeration, communications. He studied me with renewed interest. Someone like you, perhaps. I almost laughed at the irony. My specialized skills, which had seemed so useless in this new world, were suddenly valuable enough to warrant a rescue mission. They saved me because of what I know about these turbines, I told my imaginary audience later, reflecting on that moment. Now I'm going to help keep all of us alive with that knowledge. After confirming I wasn't infected and explaining my expertise, Reynolds and his partner helped me gather my few possessions. The descent to their small boat was a relief. After nearly a week trapped on the turbine, returning to sea level felt strangely disorienting. As we approached the Northern Star, I could see more people on deck watching our arrival. They maintained a cautious distance as I boarded, studying me for any signs of infection. Besides Reynolds, there appeared to be 8 others, a mix of men and women, most with the distinctive look of people who worked on or near the water. This is Dr. Chen. Reynolds introduced a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a medical kit at her side. She'll need to examine you before you can join the main group. The examination was thorough. Temperature check, visual inspection for any wounds or black veins, questions about my health and exposure. Finally, Dr. Chen nodded to Reynolds. He's clean. No signs of infection. Only then did the group relax somewhat, though I could see they maintained the wariness of people who had learned harsh lessons about trust in this new world. Welcome aboard, Reynolds said, more warmly now. Get him some proper food, he instructed, one of the crew. Then we'll talk about what you know and how you can help us. The meal they provided was simple, fish stew and hard bread, but after days of near starvation it tasted like the finest cuisine imaginable. I had to force myself to eat slowly, knowing my shrunken stomach would rebel against too much too quickly. As I ate, Reynolds explained their situation. They had been at sea when the outbreak hit the mainland, returning from a fishing expedition. By the time they approached Rockland Harbor, the infection had already spread throughout the town. They witnessed the chaos firsthand. People attacking each other in the streets, the initial military response, the fires spreading as systems failed. They were trying to quarantine the harbor by then, Reynolds said, but I knew the area well enough to find a way through the blockade at night. We made it to Fox Island and found a few survivors there already. Summer residents who'd been cut off when the ferry stopped running. Over the past week, they had established a secure perimeter on the island, organized their resources, and begun making cautious trips to gather more supplies and look for survivors with valuable skills. My light signals had caught their attention. During one such expedition, We need engineers, mechanics, people who know how to build and fix things, Reynolds explained. The old world's infrastructure is failing already. Power grids down, fuel supplies limited. If we're going to survive long-term, we need sustainable solutions. I can help with that, I said, feeling useful for the first time in days. These turbines generate enormous power. With the right equipment, we could establish a connection to the island, provide all the electricity you'd need. Reynolds nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. That's exactly what we hoped. Tomorrow we'll return with more people and proper equipment. Start figuring out which turbines are in the best position to serve our needs. As night fell, I was provided a small berth in the trawler's cabin. After nearly a week of sleeping, in the cramped maintenance hub, the simple bunk felt luxurious. Before sleeping, I took out my satellite phone and recorded what I hoped would be my final entry from this ordeal. I've been rescued by a group of survivors led by a former Coast Guard captain, I said, still speaking to Ellie, though she couldn't hear me. They're establishing a sustainable community on an island off the coast. My knowledge of the wind turbines makes me valuable to them. For the first time since this all began, I can see a path forward. I paused, then added the thought that had been growing in my mind since rescue became a reality. But I haven't forgotten about you, Ellie. You're in Colorado, thousands of miles away, and I have no way of knowing if you're safe. These people saved me because I have skills they need. I'll help them build their community, make it secure and sustainable. And then, somehow, I'm going to find a way to reach you. Morning came with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before, the outbreak. After a simple breakfast of more fish stew and what Reynolds called emergency coffee, a weak brew made from carefully rationed grounds, we began planning the turbine salvage operation. The Northern Star's crew had gathered around a makeshift planning table on deck. Besides Reynolds and Dr. Chen, I met the core members of their group. Mira, a former naval electrician, Paolo, who had worked on the island's small power grid before the outbreak, Luis, a commercial fisherman who owned the Northern Star, and several others with various practical skills. We need to select the right turbines, I explained, sketching a rough map of the wind farm. Ideally, we want units closer to the island that have sustained minimal damage and have the most accessible connection points. Based on what I observed during my time stranded, turbines 12 through 15 would be our best options. What about the infected? Asked Mira, the electrician. You said your service vessel was overrun. The windward drifted far off during the storm, I replied. Last I saw, it was heading northeast, away from both the wind farm and Fox Island. The threat should be minimal, but we'll need to remain vigilant. Reynolds nodded. We'll post lookouts and approach cautiously. How many people do you need for this operation? I considered the technical challenges. At minimum, 4 with engineering, or electrical experience. We'll need to disconnect the selected turbines from the main array, reconfigure their output systems, and prep them for a direct connection to the island's grid. And how much power are we talking about? Paolo asked. Each turbine can generate up to 5 megawatts at peak capacity, I said. Even one functioning unit would provide more than enough electricity for your entire community, with substantial surplus. The group exchanged glances, clearly impressed by the potential. Reynolds stood up. Let's get moving then. Daylight's burning, and we don't want to be out here after dark if we can avoid it. We selected a team of 6, myself, Mira, Paolo, Reynolds, and 2 others with mechanical experience. The rest would remain on the Northern Star, keeping watch and ready to extract us if trouble appeared. We loaded tools and equipment into 2 smaller boats and set out toward Turbine 12, which I had identified as our prime target. As we approached the massive structure, I felt a strange sense of homecoming. After spending nearly a week trapped on Turbine 7, the sight of these industrial giants had become oddly comforting. They represented order, engineering precision, and human achievement in a world that had suddenly become chaotic and primitive. The climb is about 250 feet to the nacelle housing, I explained to the team as we secured our boats to the access ladder. We'll need to make several trips to transport all the equipment. Anyone with issues concerning heights should speak up now. No one objected, though I could see apprehension on some faces as they gazed up at the towering structure. Heights were an occupational hazard in my former life, but for most people, climbing a 25-story tower over open ocean was understandably intimidating. "I'll lead," I said, checking my safety harness. "Follow my path exactly, use all safety clips, and we'll be fine. These structures are designed to withstand hurricane-force winds and remain stable." The climb was arduous, especially for those unaccustomed to it. We took it slowly, with frequent rests on the platforms spaced at intervals up the interior ladder. By the time we all reached the nacelle housing at the top, nearly 2 hours had passed, and everyone was exhausted except for me. "Take a breather," I told the group. "Then we'll begin the assessment and modification process." While they rested, I conducted a thorough examination of the turbine systems. Turbine 12 was in excellent condition, all major components intact. Control systems functional on backup power and no significant storm damage. It was almost as if the apocalypse had completely bypassed this lonely sentinel out at sea. "Good news," I announced to the team. "This unit is in near-perfect condition. With the modifications I'm planning, we should be able to isolate it from the array and reconfigure it for direct supply to the island." We spent the next several hours working methodically through the necessary changes. Mira proved exceptionally valuable, her naval electrical experience translating well to the turbines. Systems. Paulo focused on understanding how we would integrate with the island's existing grid, while Reynolds and the others assisted with the physical modifications. By late afternoon, we had successfully disconnected Turbine 12 from the main array and reconfigured its output systems for independent operation. The next phase would involve running a submarine cable from the turbine to Fox Island, a challenging but feasible task given the equipment and expertise we had available. As we prepared to descend with the first batch of tools and data, Reynolds's radio crackled to life. It was the lookout on the Northern Star. "Captain, we've got movement to the northeast. Vessel approaching, looks like a small speedboat moving fast." Reynolds grabbed his binoculars and scanned the horizon. "I see it. Can't identify, but it's definitely not military. Approaching directly toward the wind farm." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Could it be survivors like us? "Maybe," Reynolds said, but his expression was grim. "Or maybe someone saw our activity and got curious. Not everyone out there is friendly these days." "Should we abort?" Mira asked, already packing up sensitive equipment. Reynolds considered for a moment. "No, we've accomplished too much to abandon now. But we accelerate. Get everything essential down to the boats now. Be prepared to extract quickly if needed." We worked with renewed urgency, transporting our most critical equipment and data down the long ladder to the waiting boats below. I kept glancing northeast, watching the approaching vessel gradually growing larger on the horizon. "That boat's moving too fast for simple curiosity," I observed to Reynolds as we made our second trip down. "They're coming with purpose." He nodded grimly. "I've seen that kind of approach before. They're hunting." "Infected?" I asked. "No," he replied. "Worse in some ways. At least the infected don't plan or strategize. These would be human predators, people who've decided that taking what others have is easier than building themselves." By the time we had loaded most of our essential equipment, the speedboat was close enough to make out details. It was a sleek vessel, clearly once expensive, with makeshift armor plating added to its hull, and what appeared to be mounted weapons on its forward deck. "Pirates," Reynolds growled. "They're forming up along the coast, attacking survivors, taking supplies, boats, weapons. We've had a few run-ins already." "What's the plan?" I asked, helping Mira secure the last of our electrical equipment. "We finish loading, then make for the northern channel," Reynolds decided. "We know those waters better than anyone. If they follow, we'll lead them through Dead Man's Reach." I didn't ask what Dead Man's Reach was, but the name seemed self-explanatory. This was Reynolds' territory, and I trusted his maritime expertise. We completed loading just as the speedboat came within a mile of our position. Through binoculars, I could see several armed figures on deck, studying our boats with equal intensity. "Everyone aboard now," Reynolds ordered. Harlan, you're with me in the lead boat. Mira, take the second boat and follow directly in our wake. As we cast off from the turbine, the speedboat altered course, now heading directly toward us. They were faster than our heavily laden craft, and gaining rapidly. They'll intercept us before we reach the island, I observed, calculating speeds and distances. Reynolds smiled grimly. That's the idea. Between us and Fox Island lies Dead Man's Reach, a narrow channel through a submerged reef field. The charts show it as navigable, but only if you know exactly where the safe passage lies. One wrong turn means tearing your hull open on granite, just below the surface. I understood his plan now. And you know the safe passage. Every twist and turn, he confirmed. Been fishing these waters for 40 years. Those boys on the fancy boat don't have local knowledge. The next hour was the most tense maritime experience of my life. Our two boats maintained a careful formation, moving at what seemed like agonizingly slow speed, while the pirate vessel closed the distance behind us. Reynolds maintained a course that appeared to be heading directly for Fox Island, but I noticed subtle adjustments to our heading that would bring us through a particularly rocky section of coastline. As we entered what must have been Dead Man's Reach, Reynolds reduced speed even further, now navigating with intense concentration. The water here looked deceptively calm and uniform, giving no indication of the hazards lurking just beneath the surface. They're 100 yards back and closing, Mira radioed from the second boat. They've got guns visible now. Maintain course and speed exactly as I do, Reynolds instructed. No deviations. The pirates were now close enough that I could hear shouted commands from their vessel. A warning shot splashed into the water 20 feet to our starboard side. They're telling us to stop and surrender the boats, I translated for Reynolds, who was too focused on navigation to pay attention to their demands. Another 50 yards, he muttered. Then we'll see who's still floating. The pirates continued gaining, now just 50 yards behind us and closing fast. Another shot, closer, this time. They clearly intended to capture rather than destroy our vessels, which gave us a slight advantage. They couldn't risk damaging the boats they wanted to seize. Brace yourselves, Reynolds warned as we made a sharp turn to port, following what appeared to be a completely arbitrary path through identical-looking water. Behind us, the pirate vessel adjusted course to follow, maintaining their high speed and closing the final distance between us. I could now clearly see the smug expressions on their faces, the confident postures of predators about to capture easy prey. Then came the sound, a horrible grinding, scraping noise followed by shouts of alarm. The pirate vessel had hit one of the submerged reefs at high speed. Their momentum carried them forward onto the rocks, the impact throwing several figures from the deck into the water. Don't look back, Reynolds instructed calmly, continuing to navigate the invisible maze with precision. We maintained course and speed, but I couldn't help glancing behind us. The pirate vessel was taking on water rapidly, its hull breached in multiple places. The armed men who had seemed so threatening moments before were now scrambling desperately to save themselves and their sinking boat. Should we help them? I asked, the humanitarian instincts of the old world still present despite everything. Reynolds gave me a long look. Those men wouldn't have shown us any mercy. They've likely killed other survivors already. We have limited resources and people who depend on us. He paused. The sea will decide their fate, not us. We continued through the treacherous channel, eventually emerging into clearer waters that led directly to Fox Island. As the island came into view, I experienced my first glimpse of what would become my new home, at least temporarily. Fox Island was naturally defensible with rocky shores and limited landing areas. The community had established a perimeter around the main harbor, with lookout posts and what appeared to be a simple but effective alarm system. As we approached, I could see people moving about with purpose, tending gardens, repairing structures, standing watch. It wasn't just a refuge, it was becoming a functioning society. As our boats docked at the small pier, residents came to help unload our equipment. News of our successful mission had clearly spread, and there was tangible excitement. about the prospect of reliable electricity. "This is Morgan, our council head." Reynolds introduced me to a tall woman with practical clothes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Captain says you're the key to getting those wind turbines working for us," she said, studying me with frank assessment. "I can make it happen," I confirmed. "We've already prepared the first turbine. With the right cable and connection points, we could have power flowing to the island within a week." Morgan nodded, satisfied. "We've been rationing generator fuel since the beginning. Reliable power would change everything for us." She gestured toward the settlement. "Let me show you where you'll be staying. Then we can discuss next steps." The tour of the island community was eye-opening. What had been primarily a summer vacation destination was transforming into a self-sufficient outpost. About 40 survivors had gathered here, bringing various skills and resources. They had organized food production, security, medical care, and basic manufacturing. Children, a handful of them, were being taught in a makeshift school. My assigned quarters were simple but comfortable. A small room in what had once been a bed and breakfast overlooking the harbor. After nearly a week on the turbine and a night on the fishing vessel, it felt luxurious. That evening, the community gathered for a meal where Reynolds formally introduced me and explained our progress with the turbine project. The reception was warm, with many questions about what electricity would mean for their daily lives. "How long before we have power?" asked a young woman who I learned was in charge of food preservation. "Assuming we can salvage the necessary cabling within a week," I explained. "We'll prioritize essential services first: refrigeration for food and medicine, water pumping systems, communications. After that, we can expand to other areas as capacity allows." "What about defenses?" asked an older man with a military bearing. "Those pirates today won't be the last threat we face." Reynolds nodded. "Harlan's expertise extends beyond just making the turbines work. He's going to help us establish a monitoring system using the turbine's height advantage. Early warning for approaching vessels, both by day and night. I hadn't considered this application, but immediately saw the potential. The turbines offered unobstructed views for miles in all directions. With the right equipment, we could create an effective surveillance network." As the meeting concluded and people dispersed to their evening duties, Dr. Chen approached me privately. "I need to ask," she said quietly. "Your family? Anyone you're looking for?" The question hit me harder than expected. In the intensity of survival and then the focus on the turbine project, I had temporarily pushed thoughts of Ellie to the background. Now they came rushing back. "My daughter," I admitted. "She's in Colorado with her mother. We've been estranged since the divorce, but I need to know if she's alive." Dr. Chen nodded with understanding. "Many of us have people we're worried about. Some have tried to make their way to find family. Few have returned." "Have you had any news from the interior?" I asked. "Any sense of how far the infection has spread?" "Limited information," she replied. "Military radio transmissions suggest containment zones across most major population centers. Some areas reportedly remain infection-free, protected by natural barriers or successful quarantine measures." She hesitated. "The Rockies might have provided some isolation, it's possible." That small possibility was enough to rekindle my determination. "I'm going to help establish this power system," I told her. "Make sure it's sustainable and train others to maintain it. But eventually, I need to find a way inland." "One step at a time," Dr. Chen advised. "For now, you're where you need to be. This community needs your skills. And perhaps as we rebuild, opportunities will emerge to safely travel and search for your daughter." That night, alone in my new quarters, I recorded another message on my satellite phone, continuing my one-sided conversation with Ellie. "I found a group of survivors on an island off the Maine coast," I told the recorder. "Good people trying to rebuild something sustainable from the ruins. My knowledge of wind energy is helping them establish reliable power. I'm safe for now with food, shelter, and purpose." I paused, looking out the window at the dark ocean and the distant, invisible presence of the wind farm. "But I haven't forgotten you, Ellie. I don't know if Colorado was spared, if you and your mother are safe in some protected zone, but I'm going to find out. These people saved me because I have skills they need. I'll help them build their community, make it secure and sustainable. And then somehow I'm going to find a way to reach you. That's a promise. The next morning, I awoke with renewed purpose. After nearly a week of pure survival on that turbine, having clear objectives and the resources to achieve them felt like a luxury. The island community had already organized a team to assist with the power project. Mira, the naval electrician, would be my primary partner, along with Paolo, who knew the island's existing infrastructure. We need to salvage submarine cable, I explained at our planning session. The wind farm's maintenance facility on the Po mainland would have had plenty, but that's in the middle of Rockland, which is overrun with infected. Reynolds considered this challenge. There's a marine supply warehouse at the north end of the harbor, less densely populated area, might have been overlooked in the initial chaos, worth checking for cable and other equipment. It's risky, Morgan objected. We've avoided mainland excursions except when absolutely necessary. Electricity is absolutely necessary, Reynolds countered. With winter coming in a few months, we'll need reliable power for heat. Solar is too inconsistent in Maine winters, and our fuel supplies for generators won't last forever. After further discussion, a plan was approved. Reynolds would lead, a small team including Mira and myself, to raid the marine warehouse. We would take the Northern Star's smallest auxiliary boat for maneuverability and stealth, approach at dawn, and be out before midday. The primary risk was infected, but we also had to consider other survivor groups who might have claimed that territory. We spent the rest of the day preparing. Weapons were distributed. I received a machete and a hunting knife. Having spent my career using tools for creation rather than destruction, the weapons felt foreign in my hands. Ever used one of these before? Asked Luis, demonstrating proper machete handling. Can't say that wind turbine maintenance required much machete work, I admitted, but I'm a quick learner. Luis showed me basic techniques, proper grip, striking angles, how to avoid the blade getting stuck. Remember, the infected don't feel pain. Only complete head trauma stops them. If you have to engage, aim here. He indicated the junction of neck and skull. But your best strategy is to avoid engagement entirely. That night, I barely slept, mentally rehearsing the mission and all potential complications. Before dawn, our team assembled at the dock. Besides Reynolds, Mira, and myself, we had Luis for his combat experience and Dr. Chen in case of injuries. Reynolds outlined the plan one final time. We approach from the north using the abandoned commercial pier. The warehouse is 3 blocks inland. Mira and Harlan identify and secure the cable and technical supplies. Luis and I provide security. Dr. Chen remains with the boat as our extraction point. We maintain radio silence unless absolutely necessary. If separated, make your way back to the extraction point. We wait until midday maximum. Then we leave, with or without everyone. His last statement hung in the air. The cold calculus of this new world, the survival of the community, outweighed any individual. I understood the logic even as it unnerved me. We departed while the sky was still dark, navigating by starlight to minimize detection. Reynolds steered us well clear of the main harbor, approaching Rockland from its northern industrial area instead. As dawn began to break, the devastated town came into view. Even from a distance, the destruction was evident. Several buildings had burned completely. Others showed signs of the desperate barricades people had created during the initial outbreak. Streets were littered with abandoned vehicles, some crashed. Others simply left with doors open when their occupants fled or turned. Most disturbing were the occasional figures visible among the ruins. Even at this distance, their movements were unmistakable. The jerky, aimless wandering of the infected. The silent ones. Their black veins wouldn't be visible from here, but their unnatural gait told the story clearly enough. We docked at an abandoned service pier well away from the main harbor. The area appeared deserted, but we moved with extreme caution, watching for any movement. Reynolds and Luis took point, weapons ready, while Mira and I focused on our surroundings and potential threats. Dr. Chen remained with the boat, setting up a small medical station and preparing for our possible quick departure. 3 blocks that way, Reynolds whispered, pointing up a side street. We move in pairs, leapfrog pattern. Luis and I advance first, then you two follow when we signal clear. Moving through the devastated town was surreal. Just a week ago, these streets had been normal, people going about their lives, businesses operating, cars passing. Now it resembled a war zone. Debris scattered everywhere, buildings with broken windows, abandoned possessions telling stories of interrupted lives. We encountered our first infected 2 blocks in, a woman in what had once been business attire, now tattered and bloodstained. Her neck and face were covered with those distinctive black veins, her movements erratic as she drifted through what remained of a small office building. Reynolds signaled us to freeze. The infected woman hadn't noticed us yet. He pointed to an alley that would let us detour around her position. We backtracked silently and took the alternative route, adding precious minutes to our journey but avoiding potential conflict. The marine supply warehouse appeared relatively untouched compared to surrounding buildings. Its heavy security shutters had protected it from looters, and its location away from residential areas meant fewer infected wandering nearby. Looks promising, Mira whispered as we approached the loading dock entrance. But how do we get in? I examined the security shutter's mechanical system. The manual override is designed for power outages. Should be a chain system inside this housing that we can operate. While Reynolds and Luis maintained security, Mira and I worked on accessing the override. After several tense minutes, we managed to raise the shutter just enough to crawl under. The warehouse interior was dark and undisturbed, suggesting no one had breached it since the outbreak. We need submarine cable, electrical connectors rated for marine use, circuit breakers, and any portable generators or batteries, I listed as we moved through the cavernous space with flashlights. Also, insulated tools for high-voltage work. The warehouse was organized by category, making our search relatively efficient. We found a storage area dedicated to cabling, including exactly what we needed. 3 large spools of marine-grade, submarine power cable, each approximately 500 feet. This is perfect, I confirmed, examining the specifications. More than enough to reach from Turbine 12 to the island substation. How do we transport it? Mira asked practically. Each of these spools weighs several hundred pounds. I located a battery-powered forklift in the warehouse's equipment section. If the battery still has charge, we can use this to load them onto a flatbed cart, then manually push it to the pier. The forklift's battery indicator showed about 30% charge, enough for our needs if used efficiently. We located the other supplies on our list, creating a pile of essential equipment. Mira found a bonus, a crate of specialized tools, designed specifically for underwater cable installation. This is better than we could have hoped for, I said as we organized our finds. Everything we need for the connection plus maintenance equipment. Reynolds appeared at the warehouse entrance. Time check. We've been here 40 minutes. Need to start moving this stuff out. Using the forklift, we loaded the cable spools and equipment onto a flatbed cart. The combined weight was substantial, but with all 4 of us pushing, we could manage the 3 blocks back to the pier. We exited the warehouse cautiously, securing the door behind us. The street remained clear, but as we began moving our heavy load, the metal wheels of the cart created more noise than was comfortable in this silent landscape. Keep it as smooth as possible, Reynolds instructed, and be ready to abandon the cart if necessary. The supplies are valuable but not worth our lives. We made it 1 block without incident, the cart's wheels protesting against the debris-strewn pavement. At the second intersection, Luis raised his fist, the signal to halt. Ahead, 3 infected wandered aimlessly in the street we needed to cross. We wait, Reynolds whispered. They move constantly. The gap will open eventually. For 15 agonizing minutes, we remained motionless, watching the infected meander across our path. Finally, they drifted far enough away to create an opening. We pushed the cart forward as smoothly as possible, wincing at every small sound. We were halfway across the intersection when one of the wheels hit a broken bottle, creating a sharp, cracking sound that seemed deafening in the silence. All three infected turned toward us simultaneously, their heads tilting in that unnatural way as they processed the sound. Then came the clicking, that rapid, mechanical sound I'd heard from Sandoval and the others on the windward, the sound of the silent ones hunting. "Move. Now," Reynolds commanded, abandoning stealth for speed. "Straight to the pier. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary." We pushed the cart forward with renewed urgency as the infected began moving toward us, picking up speed as they detected our presence. Their movements became more coordinated, more predatory as they closed the distance. The closest one had been a man in his 30s, wearing the remains of what might have been a mechanic's uniform. The black veins covered his entire visible, neck and face pulsing slightly with each movement. His eyes were clouded but focused on our motion with terrifying intensity. Luis and Reynolds took defensive positions while Mira and I continued pushing the cart forward. The infected were 30 yards behind us now and gaining. We had another block to go before reaching the pier. "Keep moving," Reynolds ordered. "We'll hold them here if needed." But more infected were appearing, drawn by the commotion. 2 emerged from a side street ahead, cutting off our direct route to the pier. "Alternate route," Reynolds decided immediately. "Next right, then left toward the waterfront." The detour would add crucial minutes to our journey, but with infected now both behind and ahead, we had no choice. We turned the heavy cart, struggling to maintain speed with the new direction. The infected behind us were closing the gap rapidly. The lead one, the former mechanic, was now only 20 yards back and moving with unsettling purpose. Luis raised his weapon, preparing to engage if necessary. "Wait," Reynolds cautioned. "Contact only if they reach within 10 yards. Sound attracts more." We pushed the cart down the side street, muscles burning with the effort. The 2 infected that had cut off our original path noticed the change in direction and began to adjust their course, but more slowly than the ones behind us. Almost to the turn, I called out, seeing the intersection ahead that would take us back toward the pier. 50 more yards. Just as we approached the intersection, disaster struck. The cart's front right wheel caught in a drainage grate, stopping our momentum abruptly. The cable spool on that side shifted precariously, threatening to topple the entire load. "Stabilize the load," I directed Mira, while Luis and Reynolds turned to face the approaching infected. The lead one was dangerously close now, less than 15 yards and closing. I knelt quickly, examining the trapped wheel. "The axle's bent. We need to lift this corner to free it." Reynolds made a quick decision. "Leave the cart. Take what we can carry and move to extraction." "We need this cable," I insisted. "Without it, the entire mission fails." "Then fix it fast," he replied grimly, raising his weapon as the first infected reached his 10-yard threshold. What happened next occurred with terrifying speed. Reynolds engaged the lead infected with clinical precision, a single blow to the junction of neck and skull that dropped it instantly. But the noise of the encounter drew more from surrounding buildings. Within seconds, our position was compromised, with infected approaching from multiple directions. "We have seconds, not minutes," Luis warned, taking position beside Reynolds. Using pure adrenaline, Mira and I lifted the corner of the cart together, freeing the wheel from the grate. The axle was damaged but still functional enough to move. "Go, go, go," Reynolds ordered, as he and Luis continued to hold the infected at bay, engaging only those that came within striking distance. We pushed the cart forward with desperate energy, making the turn toward the waterfront. The pier was visible now, maybe 200 yards ahead, with Dr. Chen watching anxiously from the boat. "She's starting the engine," Mira observed. She sees the situation. The infected were still coming, more appearing with each passing moment. Reynolds and Luis continued their defensive retreat, walking backward while facing the growing threat, engaging only when absolutely necessary to create space. When we reached the pier, the next challenge became apparent. The cart was too wide for the narrow walkway leading to our boat. "The cable," I said quickly. "We need at least 1 spool. The rest we can come back for if possible." Reynolds made the call. 1 spool, essential tools, leave the rest." Using the last of our strength, Mira and I maneuvered the smallest spool off the cart. Each of us grabbed a selection of critical tools and connectors. The spool was extraordinarily heavy, requiring both of us to carry it, with Reynolds and Luis now fully occupied keeping the infected from overwhelming our position. The narrow pier became our final gauntlet. Infected were closing from the shore side while we struggled with our awkward heavy load toward the waiting boat. Dr. Chen had positioned it perfectly for a quick departure, the engine idling and ready. "Move faster," Reynolds urged, as the distance between us and the infected continued to shrink. With a final, desperate effort, we reached the boat. Mira and I heaved the cable spool aboard, nearly capsizing us in the process. Reynolds and Luis jumped in last, pushing away from the pier just as the first infected reached the edge. Several tried to follow, plunging awkwardly into the water. To my horror, I discovered they could navigate underwater, albeit clumsily, moving toward our boat with slow but determined strokes. "They can swim," I called out in warning. "Not well enough," Reynolds replied, opening the throttle to full power. The boat surged forward, quickly outpacing the waterborne infected and heading back toward Fox Island. As we sped away from the devastated town, I looked back at the pier. Dozens of infected had gathered at the edge, some still attempting to follow us into the water. We'd escaped, but barely, and we'd left behind 2/3 of the cable and many of the supplies we'd found. "Will it be enough?" Reynolds asked once we were safely away. I nodded, examining the spool we'd managed to rescue. 500 feet, just enough to reach from Turbine 12 to the island's main power connection point. We'll have no redundancy, no room for error, but it can work. Despite the close call, the mission was categorized as a success when we returned to the island. We had the essential component required for the wind power connection, along with enough tools to complete the installation. The community leaders voted to postpone any further mainland excursions until the power system was operational. Over the next 4 days, we worked tirelessly on implementing the connection. The cable installation was the most challenging aspect, requiring us to lay the submarine cable from the turbine to the island, using modified fishing vessels and improvised equipment. Every foot of cable was precious, requiring precise route planning to ensure we had enough length. Mira proved invaluable during this phase. Her naval electrical experience included work with similar marine power systems, and her calm problem-solving complemented my more theoretical knowledge of the turbine systems. By the 5th day after our warehouse expedition, we were ready for the final connection and power-up sequence. A crowd gathered at the island's small power station as Mira and I made the final preparations. "If this works," Morgan told the assembled community, "it changes everything for us. Sustainable power means refrigeration, communications, security systems, hot water. It means not just surviving but beginning to rebuild." The actual moment of connection was anticlimactic from a visual standpoint. Simply the closing of several circuits and the careful monitoring of power levels as electricity began flowing from Turbine 12 into the island's grid. But the implications were immediately apparent as lights came on in the control room, followed by cheers from the onlookers. "We're showing 5 megawatts of stable power generation," I confirmed, watching the readouts. More than enough for all current and projected needs of the community. That evening, the island celebrated. For the first time since the outbreak, the main buildings had electric lights. The refrigeration systems were running, food stores could be properly preserved, and the water pumping station was operating at full capacity. During the celebration, Dr. Chen found me sitting slightly apart from the main group, looking toward the mainland. "You're thinking about her," she said, referring to my daughter Ellie. "About Colorado." I nodded. "Every day. This accomplishment means a lot to me, but it also reminds me of my ultimate goal. I need to find her to know if she's safe. The mainland's not safe," Chen reminded me gently, "and the interior even less so. Reports we've gathered suggest the infection spread rapidly through major population centers. Military containment focused on strategic areas, abandoning others entirely. I know the risks," I acknowledged. "But I also know that geographic isolation helped some areas. The Rockies create natural barriers. If any places remained protected, the mountain communities might have. Dr. Chen studied me for a moment. We've been gathering information from various sources. Military radio transmissions, other survivor groups we've contacted via shortwave. There are rumors of secure zones in the Mountain West, areas where the military maintained effective quarantine. This was the first concrete hope I'd heard. Where exactly? The information isn't precise, she cautioned. But consistent reports mention parts of western Colorado, particularly around the military installations near Colorado Springs, and some of the more isolated mountain communities. Limited infection, functional, infrastructure. My heart raced. Ellie and her mother had settled in Boulder after the divorce. Not exactly Colorado Springs, but in the same general region. It wasn't much, but it was something. How would someone even begin to make that journey? I asked. It's thousands of miles through infected territory. Not impossible, Chen replied carefully. We've heard of supply chains being maintained between secure zones, military transport primarily, but civilian contractors as well. Routes that avoid major population centers, using secondary roads and strict quarantine protocols. I considered this information. So, access to these transports would be key. She nodded. From what we understand, the military maintains strict control over who travels between secure zones. Priority goes to essential personnel, medical staff, engineers, technical specialists. She gave me a significant look. People with skills in high demand like alternative energy experts. The implication was clear. My expertise with wind turbine systems might be my ticket to authorized travel, a way to reach Colorado and possibly find Ellie. Reynolds won't want to lose you, Chen continued. You've become essential to the community's future plans. But he's also a father. He understands the need to find family. In the days that followed, I threw myself into ensuring the power system was robust and sustainable. I created detailed documentation, trained Mira and Paolo on maintenance procedures, and implemented redundancy systems where possible. If I was going to leave, I needed to make sure the community could manage without me. 2 weeks after the successful power connection, I approached Reynolds with my request. I need to find my daughter, I said simply. She's in Colorado, or was when this all started. I've heard there might be secure zones there, areas that remained protected. Reynolds didn't seem surprised. Chen mentioned you might be considering this. It's suicide, Harlan. The mainland is overrun and the spaces between secure zones, if they exist, are lawless. Pirates, infected, desperate survivors who'd kill for a can of beans. I understand the risks, I insisted. But I have to try. Wouldn't you, if it was your child? He was silent for a long moment. Yes, he finally admitted. I would walk through hell itself. He sighed heavily. Let me talk to some contacts. There are other survivor communities we've established communication with. Some have more direct lines to military channels. If transport between secure zones exists, maybe we can find you a path. It took another week for information to filter back through Reynolds' network of contacts. When it came, it offered both hope and challenges. There's a military supply convoy that runs from the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard to inland secure zones, Reynolds informed me. Monthly rotations, heavily armed, following established safe corridors. Next one leaves in 3 weeks. They take civilian specialists with critical skills if properly vouched for. Can you get me on it? I asked directly. Possibly. I have a contact at Portsmouth, former Coast Guard like me. He says they're actively recruiting people with renewable energy experience for the Western secure zones. Apparently, they're building self-sufficient communities and need expertise. The plan began to take shape. Reynolds would arrange transport to Portsmouth, using his contact to get me clearance for the convoy. From there, I would travel with military escort through a network of secure corridors, eventually reaching Colorado if all went well. The risks were enormous. Even with military protection, the journey would cross thousands of miles of compromised territory. But it was a chance, perhaps my only chance, to find Ellie. As departure day approached, I made final preparations. I created comprehensive manuals for the wind power system, trained additional community members in basic maintenance, and helped design expansion plans for connecting more turbines to increase capacity. On my last night on Fox Island, I climbed to the highest point. Looking out toward the wind farm that had saved my life in more ways than one, the massive turbines turned steadily in the offshore breeze, their navigation lights blinking in the darkness. From this vantage point, I could see Turbine 7, where I'd spent those desperate days alone, convinced I would die. Sometimes I climb, back up to the turbine tops and look toward the mainland, I said into my recorder, still speaking to Ellie though she couldn't hear me. The silent ones are still out there spreading. But up here, with the wind at my back and the sun powering, our community, for the first time since it all began, I can see a future. And someday when we're strong enough, I'll find my way to Colorado. I have to know if you're still out there. Tomorrow that journey would begin. Through infected territories, past military checkpoints, across a changed and dangerous landscape. Odds were against me, but I had survived against impossible odds before. Engineering isn't just about fixing machines. It's about solving problems, finding paths forward when none seem to exist. That's what kept me alive on that turbine during those desperate days of the outbreak. That's what helped me bring power to this island community when they needed it most. And that's what would guide me across a broken country to find my daughter.